So Israel's current foreign minister, Tzipi Livni, has been elected in a party leadership primary to head the governing party in Israel, the Kadima party. She'll now be called upon by Israel's president, Shimon Peres, to try and form a governing coalition. Israel can now put a new government in place, headed by Livni, without general elections, and that will almost certainly be what Livni tries to do. Coalition government forming negotiations in Israel are a messy business. That could take a number of weeks. Livni, it's possible, may decide that she doesn't want her star to fade, and her star is shining quite bright now with the Israeli public, that she doesn't want her star to fade by giving too much away in coalition negotiations. And it's conceivable that Livni herself will decide to go to elections. If she fails to form a government, she will anyway be forced to go to elections. If that happens, the next step will be for the parties to agree on a date for elections. That would be about 90 days after the negotiations fail. And that takes us to probably late February or March 2009, where Israel would have general elections, and after that a new government would be formed. What that actually means is you may have a transitional government in place in Israel right through until perhaps even May 2009, 8 months from now. And that would obviously have a knock-on effect in terms of negotiations, peace process, other things like that. In the public opinion polls, Tzipi Livni, the head of Kadima, and the head of Likud, Netanyahu, run rather close. The other alternative is that Livni does form a government, she forms a new coalition, and then she could govern for 1.5, even 2 years without having to go to elections. Many of her critics on the right are already saying, well, if there's no elections, then that government would not have legitimacy, it wouldn't have a popular mandate, and it would not be in a position to negotiate or make concessions. We've always heard that in the past. Somehow you always have a mandate to make war, but it's very difficult to have a mandate to make peace, according to some people. What would Livni be like as a prime minister? Well, the election, the primary that she just won, was not too full of substantive policy debates, and Livni has never, for instance, held a senior economic portfolio. But let's just touch briefly on what her positions might be on some of the Middle East security, peace-related issues. Starting with the Palestinians, Livni has headed the negotiation team with her Palestinian interlocutor, Abu Ala, on these final status negotiations for the past several months. I think the common wisdom is that Livni has been serious in these negotiations, and that the negotiations themselves have been substantive. Livni used to be a member of the Likud and came from what's called the revisionist right, and she's travelled quite a journey and now clearly supports the two-state solution. What we don't yet know is whether she's travelled far enough or can travel far enough to close a realistic deal. We don't know her final position on territory, on Jerusalem, and on those permanent status issues. She has come out quite strongly in drawing this somewhat simplistic division in the region between moderates and extremists, and one of her first tests will be whether she continues with the ceasefire with Hamas in Gaza. She wasn't a fan of that ceasefire as a minister. My hope would be that in the Prime Minister's seat she sees the advantages of that, but as I said, an early test. On the Syria track, Livni wasn't involved in the talks. The talks were run by the Prime Minister's office with Turkish mediation, and Livni has not really shown her hand yet on whether she'd continue those talks. Those talks do have the support of Israel's military leadership, so the expectation fairly could be that Livni continues with the Syria talks, but as I said, no commitment on her part one way or the other. She has spoken of her recognition that in a peace deal it would have to be the known formula, in other words, land for peace. One other thing that I just comment on is Iran. Tzipi Livni will be under pressure in general, and coming from the macho politics in Israel, which is not unique to Israel, to show that she can be tough even though she's never been a general, she's a woman, and that will be used as well. Can she be tough enough? Does she have the experience? And that critique and that call on her to be tough may come to the head most on the Iran issue. Livni has been someone who, on two fronts at least, I think we can say, has preferred diplomatic solutions. During the Lebanon War in 2006, she supported the UN resolution, and she has been one of Israel's leaders who said, let's not ratchet up the rhetoric. Let's not be thumping our fists on the table. So she supported a more soft-spoken and diplomatic approach. Obviously too early to say how that would play out on Iran. If Livni does become Prime Minister, just worth mentioning, it would mean that all three branches of government in Israel would be run by women. The chair of Israel's Supreme Court, the head of the Supreme Court is a woman, Dorit Beinish. The Speaker of the Israeli Parliament, the legislative branch is a woman, Dalia Itzik. And Tzipi Livni could well become the next Prime Minister.